The restaurant buzzed with its usual Friday night energy, silverware clinking, conversations overlapping, the low hum of jazz from the corner speaker. Waitresses rushed between tables with trays balanced like acrobats, while guests in tailored suits and sparkling dresses laughed over glasses of wine. At the far end, near the window where city lights spilled in like stars, a young waitress named Leela adjusted her apron nervously. She wasn't the kind who thrived in crowds. In fact, most nights, she wished she could disappear into the wallpaper. But tonight, something caught her eye. A man, perhaps in his 30s, sat alone at a table. His gaze shifted constantly, scanning the menu with furrowed brows, trying to get the server's attention, but hesitating each time. Then Leela noticed it, the hearing aids behind his ears, the way his lips moved soundlessly, the subtle frustration in his face. He was deaf. Most waitresses would have struggled, fumbling through notes or exaggerated gestures. But Leela, she knew another language. Taking a deep breath, she approached quietly, her hands trembling slightly. She smiled, and instead of speaking, she signed, "Hello, can I take your order?" The man's eyes widened, surprise flashing into relief. Slowly, carefully, he signed back. "You know sign language?" Leela nodded, her smile softening. "Yes," she signed, her movements graceful yet shy. For the first time that evening, the man relaxed. The invisible wall between him and the noisy room melted away with a single gesture. What Leela didn't know was that just a few tables away, hidden behind the glow of a wine glass and the shadow of an oak pillar, someone else had been watching. A man in an impeccably tailored suit, sharp eyes, the kind that missed nothing, his expression unreadable, yet intent. The billionaire, CEO Alexander Kane, had just witnessed the moment that would change everything. The man's name was Ethan. He told Leela in signs that he hated eating out, because ordering food was always a battle. Some servers ignored him. Others grew impatient when he pointed at menus or typed on his phone. Leela listened with her eyes, nodding gently, her hands flowing in response. She explained she had learned sign language. As a teenager, her younger cousin had been born deaf. She remembered how isolated her cousin felt at family gatherings, how she would sit in corners while others laughed and talked, invisible in a room full of people. That memory had driven Leela to learn. She spent months watching videos, practicing in front of mirrors, attending free classes at the community center. Her cousin's face, when Leela first signed to her pure joy, breaking through years of loneliness, made every hour worth it. Ethan's tense shoulders loosened with every passing second. For the first time in weeks, he felt human in a restaurant, not like a problem to be solved or ignored. He signed with a small smile, "You're the first person who's ever made me feel welcome." Leela blushed, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Her reply was simple but honest. Everyone deserves to feel welcome. At the other end of the dining room, Alexander Kane swirled the wine in his glass, his piercing gaze never leaving the scene. He was known as ruthless in business. His empire stretched across technology, finance, and hospitality. Most people feared him. Those who didn't learned to quickly. He had built Kane Industries from nothing, clawing his way up from a childhood of poverty and loss, transforming pain into power. But tonight, as he watched the shy waitress sign effortlessly with the deaf man, something in him stirred. A memory, buried deep but never forgotten. A small boy with hearing aids, laughing as he splashed in a lake. A moment of carelessness. A silence that followed, deeper than any he had known before. Alexander had attended countless dinners, shaken hands with heads of state, silenced boardrooms with a single look. Yet none of those moments carried the quiet power of this one, the simple kindness of a young woman who thought no one was watching. He leaned back, his lips pressing into the faintest line of thought. Interesting, he murmured to himself. His assistant, Marcus, approached discreetly. "Sir, the car is ready whenever you are." Alexander raised a hand without looking away from Leela. Not yet. Back at Ethan's table, laughter silent but rich lit his face. He gestured clumsily, trying to describe how ridiculous it was when people shouted at him as though volume could replace understanding. Leela giggled, covering her mouth, her eyes shining with genuine amusement. They weren't just communicating, they were connecting. When Leela brought his food, she stayed a little longer than usual, asking about his work, his hobbies. Ethan signed about photography, about capturing the world in still frames since sound had never been part of his story. He showed her pictures on his phone, stunning landscapes, portraits full of emotion, moments frozen in time. Leela admitted she loved sketching in her free time, doodles on napkins, drawings in the margins of old notebooks. She pulled out a small pad from her apron pocket, showing him a quick sketch she'd done during her break. The city's skyline, viewed from the restaurant's back alley. Ethan's eyes lit up. He signed enthusiastically about composition and lighting, and for those precious minutes, they weren't server and customer. They were two artists sharing their passion. For once, Leela wasn't just a waitress delivering plates. She was a person being seen. A loud burst of laughter erupted from another table. Wealthy businessmen, their ties loosened, wine flowing too freely. One of them, red-faced and clearly drunk, noticed Leela signing and raised an eyebrow. "Hey, sweetheart," he called crudely, his words slurring. "What's with the hand dance? Practicing for TikTok? Or is that some kind of witchcraft?" The group chuckled, oblivious to the cruelty of their words. One of his companions elbowed him, trying to quiet him down, but the drunk man continued. "Maybe she's casting a spell. Wave those hands some more, honey." Leela froze, her cheeks burning with humiliation. Ethan's face darkened, the old shame creeping back, the shame of being different, of being mocked for something he couldn't control. Other diners looked away uncomfortably. The manager started moving toward the situation, but before anyone could intervene, another voice cut through the room. Low, commanding, deadly calm. "Apologize." The businessmen turned, laughter choking in their throats. Alexander Kane had risen from his table, his presence towering like a storm. His eyes locked on the man who had spoken, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The entire restaurant fell into silence. Leela blinked in shock. She had no idea the most powerful man in the room had been watching her. The businessman stammered. "Suddenly sober, Mr. Kane." I was just joking." Alexander's voice was ice, each word precise and cutting. "You mocked her for kindness. You mocked him for being born different. That tells me everything I need to know about you." He took a step forward, and the businessman actually flinched. "Get out." The man opened his mouth to protest, but Alexander's stare silenced him. "Now," Alexander added, his voice dropping even lower, more dangerous, "and if I ever see you in any establishment I own or have influence over, you'll find your business opportunities in this city have mysteriously evaporated. Are we clear?" The men scrambled to their feet, throwing bills on the table far more than their meal cost before fleeing into the night. Like scolded children, every guest in the restaurant whispered, stunned. Some pulled out their phones, already texting about what they'd witnessed. Alexander Kane defending a waitress? This would be news by morning. Leela stood frozen, tray in hand, her heart hammering in her chest. She didn't know whether to thank him or to run. Part of her wanted to disappear, to avoid the attention now focused on her. But Alexander Kane simply straightened his cuffs, glanced once at her, and for the briefest moment, his stern eyes softened, revealing something almost vulnerable beneath the steel. Then, without another word, he returned to his seat. The shy waitress had no idea that her simple act of kindness had not only touched a deaf man's heart, it had caught the attention of a billionaire. And his silent watch was only the beginning. Asterisk after the confrontation, Leela felt like the whole restaurant had eyes on her. Some looked at her with admiration, others with curiosity, a few with envy. But she kept her head down, finishing her shift as if nothing had happened. Though her hands trembled every time she picked up a tray, her co-workers whispered as she passed, "Did you see that? Alexander Kane himself. Who does she think she is?" Leela ignored them, focusing on her work. But the weight of what had happened pressed on her shoulders like a physical thing. Ethan caught her attention before leaving. He signed softly, his expression warm and grateful. "Thank you. Not just for signing, for standing with me when others wouldn't." Leela shook her head, smiling shyly, her hands moving with genuine feeling. "I should be thanking you. You reminded me why I learned in the first place." He handed her a small card, his photography page. She tucked it into her apron, touched by the gesture. They exchanged a moment of understanding to people who knew what it meant to feel invisible. But as Ethan rushed died down, she still felt a heavy presence behind her. The restaurant gaze that hadn't left her since the beginning, visibly nervous. His name was Gerald, a thin man who usually barked orders, but now looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Leela," he whispered urgently, glancing around, "Mr. Kane wants to see you." Her heart nearly stopped. "Mr. Kane? The billionaire CEO?" Gerald nodded frantically. Yes. He's waiting. Don't make him wait longer." He paused, then added in a lower voice, "Whatever he wants. Be smart about it. Men like that, they don't just talk to people like us." She wiped her hands on her apron, anxiety clawing up her throat. What could he possibly want? To reprimand her for causing a scene? To question her about the incident? The manager motioned toward the private booth where Alexander sat alone, his wine untouched, his posture perfect despite the late hour. The restaurant had emptied except for a few staff cleaning up, their movements quiet and careful. As she approached, her legs trembled. She had never been this close to someone like him. His aura was sharp, commanding like gravity itself bent toward him. Even sitting still, he dominated this space. "Sit," Alexander said quietly, gesturing to the seat across from him. His tone wasn't harsh, but it wasn't a request either. Leela slid into the booth, her back straight, hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. For a long moment, he didn't speak. He simply studied her, the way her eyes darted nervously to the table and back, the way her hands fidgeted despite her attempt to still them, the way she held herself with a strange mixture of fear and quiet dignity. Finally, he broke the silence. "You speak sign language?" Leela nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. My cousin." He raised a hand, stopping her. Not many people would bother to learn. "You did. Why?" Her throat tightened. No one had ever asked her that before. Most people assumed it was a hobby, something quirky she'd picked up. But he wanted to know the real reason. "Because I don't like seeing people left out," she said softly, finding her voice. "My cousin." She used to cry at parties because no one would talk to her. Everyone would be laughing and chatting, and she'd be sitting alone, watching. I wanted her to know she mattered, that someone saw her. Alexander leaned back, his expression unreadable. But something flickered in his eyes, something almost human beneath the steel. A recognition, perhaps, or a memory stirred. "You work here every night?" he asked, his tone matter-of-fact. "Yes," she said softly. "Double shifts, usually. Rent is high, and my mother's medical bills." She stopped herself, cheeks burning. Why was she telling him this? He didn't care about her struggles. But Alexander's gaze sharpened with interest, not judgment. He tapped the table once, decisive, like a chess player making a move. "Quit this job." Lila's eyes widened. "Quit? Yes. Come work for me." Her mouth went dry. The words didn't make sense. "Work for you? I don't understand. I'm just a waitress. I don't have any qualifications for. I need someone who sees what others don't." Alexander interrupted, his voice low but certain. "Someone who doesn't just hear words but understands meaning. Someone who notices the man sitting alone while others walk past. Someone who reads between the lines." His gaze locked onto hers. "Tonight, you showed me that's exactly who you are." Leela stared at him, stunned. A billionaire CEO was offering her a shy waitress who lived paycheck to paycheck an entirely new life. It felt like a dream, or a trap. "But what would I even do?" she whispered. "Be my personal interpreter," he said simply. "My eyes and ears in rooms where no one else pays attention. I deal with people every day, executives, investors, rivals. They all say one thing and mean another. I need someone who can see through the performance." Her instincts screamed to say no. It was too much, too sudden, too unreal. Men like Alexander Kane didn't just offer people like her new lives. There had to be a catch. "Mr. Kane," she whispered, her voice shaking, I'm not like you. I don't belong in your world. I wouldn't know what to do, what to say, Alexander's gaze hardened, but his voice remained calm, almost gentle. Neither did I not at first. I grew up in a two-room apartment with a single mother who worked 3 jobs. I wore the same shoes until they had holes. I was nobody. He leaned forward slightly. The only difference between us is that I didn't run from opportunity when it knocked. He slid a sleek black card across the table. Embossed letters spelled out his name and a single phone number. Think about it. Call me tomorrow. The offer expires in 24 hours. Then he stood, leaving bills on the table far beyond the cost of his meal, enough to cover her wages for a week, and walked out into the night, his long coat billowing behind him like a shadow. Leela sat alone in the empty booth, the card glowing under the dim lamp, her world tilting off its axis. Back in her tiny apartment, Leela sat on the edge of her bed, the card resting in her palm like a burning coal. The apartment was cramped, a single room with a kitchenette in one corner, a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in, and a window that overlooked an alley. Her mother slept in the small bedroom, the only actual room her breathing labored even in sleep. The medical bills sat in a pile on the counter, red stamps screaming overdue. Leela had worked at that restaurant for 3 years. 3 years of sore feet, rude customers, and barely enough money to survive. She was good at being invisible, at not causing trouble, at staying in her place. But tonight, she had been seen. Her mind raced. Could she really walk away from the only life she knew? Could she risk stepping into a billionaire's world? What if she failed? What if he fired her after a week and she ended up worse off than before? She thought of Ethan's smile, the way his face had lit up when someone finally treated him like a person. She thought of her cousin's tears at those long-ago parties. She thought of the cruel laughter silenced by Alexander's voice, and slowly, she realized this wasn't about him. It was about her. For years, she had made herself small, invisible, safe. But maybe it was time to stop hiding. The shy waitress had been offered the kind of chance people only dreamed about. But every choice came with a cost. And Leela Torres was about to discover that some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. Leela barely slept that night. The black card burned on her nightstand like a secret too heavy to keep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, imagining 100 different futures. In one future, she stayed at the restaurant, safe and small, watching her life slip by in double shifts and aching feet. In another, she took the risk and failed spectacularly, ending up unemployed and humiliated. But in another future, one that terrified and thrilled her, she became someone new, someone who mattered. By morning, she had made her choice. She went to the restaurant for her shift, her heart pounding. The manager looked surprised to see her arrive early. "Leela, your shift doesn't start for an hour." She took a deep breath. "I'm quitting, Gerald." His eyebrows shot up. "Quitting? But you can't just—" "I've been given another opportunity," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "Thank you for everything, but this is my notice." The manager sputtered. Co-workers whispered. But Leela only repeated her line, refusing to give details. She collected her final paycheck, cleaned out her locker, and walked out of the restaurant for the last time. The morning air felt different, sharper, Full of possibility, her hands trembled as she dialed the number on the card. It rang once, twice. A calm, professional voice answered. Mr. Kane's office. This is Leila Torres. Mr. Kane gave me this number. Ah, Miss Torres. Mr. Kane was expecting your call. Report to Kane Tower, Monday, 9 a.m. I'm emailing you the details now. The line went dead before she could respond. She stared at her phone, heart flipping. This was real, impossibly, terrifyingly real. That weekend, Leila barely ate. She tried on every piece of clothing she owned. Nothing looked right. Everything was too casual, too worn, too much like a waitress trying to be something else. Finally, she settled on a simple black dress and her least scuffed shoes. She would be herself. If that wasn't good enough, then this job was never meant for her anyway. Monday morning arrived like a judgment day. Kane Tower loomed above the city like a monument of glass and steel, its surface reflecting the sky like a mirror. Leila felt impossibly small as she entered the marble lobby, her simple dress and worn shoes standing out among polished heels and tailored suits. The lobby itself was a cathedral of wealth-soaring ceilings, modern art installations, the subtle hum of hidden technology. Security guards in sharp uniforms monitored everything with quiet efficiency. Yet the receptionist greeted her respectfully, as if she'd been expected. Miss Torres, this way, please. She was led to a private elevator, one that required a keycard to operate. The receptionist swiped it and pressed the button for the top floor. Mr. Kane is expecting you. The elevator rose so smoothly Leila barely felt the movement, but her stomach dropped anyway. The numbers climbed higher and higher, 40, 45, 50 until finally they reached the penthouse level. The doors opened to reveal Alexander Kane's domain. The office wasn't just an office. It was an empire contained in glass and steel. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the entire skyline. The city sprawling below like a kingdom. Assistants moved swiftly through sleek corridors, speaking in hushed tones into wireless headsets. Phones buzzed quietly. Screens flashed with stock prices and international headlines in a dozen languages. And at the center of it all stood Alexander, composed, commanding, reviewing documents with the precision of a surgeon. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Lila's yearly rent, his presence dominating the space without effort. When he saw her, he didn't smile, didn't offer pleasantries. He simply handed her a folder. "Read this," he said. Leila opened it with shaking hands. Dense pages of a merger proposal stared back at her legal jargon, endless numbers, terms she didn't fully understand. Her eyes widened, panic rising. "Tell me what you see," Alexander said, folding his arms, his gaze sharp. Her chest tightened. I can't do this. The urge to run nearly overwhelmed her. But then she remembered Ethan, the deaf guest, the way she had translated meaning instead of just words. She forced herself to breathe, to look deeper, to trust her instincts. She read slowly, carefully, letting the words sink in. And then she noticed it, a line buried on page 6, hidden in technical language, clause for C. She whispered, her finger trembling on the page. "It gives the other company rights to your patents in 5 years. It looks harmless, it's worded like a standard licensing agreement, but it's not. It's a trap. In 5 years, they'd own your technology. You'd be locked out of your own innovations. The room fell silent. Alexander's assistants glanced at each other, surprised. Alexander's lips twitched ever so slightly, the closest he came to a smile. Good. You're not here to serve coffee, Miss Torres. You're here because you see what others miss. He took the folder back. That clause was intentional. I wanted to know if you'd catch it. Lila's heart pounded. She had passed the test. Welcome to Kane Industries, Alexander said simply, as days passed. Lila adjusted to her new role, though adjusted felt like too gentle a word. It was more like being thrown into deep water and learning to swim while drowning. She sat quietly in meetings, observing Alexander's ruthless efficiency, his ability to silence a room with a single look, the way he could dissect a business proposal in minutes and find its fatal flaw. But she also noticed things others ignored. The flicker of tension in rival executives' eyes when certain topics rose. The way some board members whispered behind closed doors. The contracts that always seemed to clean, to perfect, as if someone had scrubbed them of evidence. Beneath the empire's polish, she sensed cracks, secrets, enemies hiding in plain sight. One evening, as she gathered her notes to leave, she overheard two executives muttering near the elevators. They didn't see her standing in the alcove, partially hidden by a marble column. She's just a waitress, one scoffed, his voice dripping with contempt. The boss trusts her too much. The other sneered. It's insulting. We went to Harvard, and he listens to asterisk her asterisk. If she digs too deep, she won't last long. People who get too close to Kane, they either learn their place or disappear. Leela froze, her pulse racing. They don't just underestimate me. They want me gone. Later, in Alexander's private office, Leela hesitated before speaking. The office was quieter now, the staff gone for the evening. City lights glowed beyond the windows, making the space feel suspended above the world. Why did you really hire me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander glanced up from his desk, his expression unreadable. He set down his pen with deliberate care. Because I need someone uncorrupted. Everyone else around me has an agenda, power, money, status. You don't, at least, not yet, she frowned. And if I fail you? He leaned back, his gaze like steel. Then you'll be like the rest of them, replaceable. His words cut deep. But they also ignited something inside her. A spark of defiance, a refusal to be dismissed. I won't fail you, she said quietly. Surprised by the certainty in her voice, Alexander studied her for a long moment, then gave the smallest nod. We'll see. For the first time, Leela realized this wasn't just a job. It was a battlefield. The shy waitress had stepped into the billionaire's world of power and deception. She thought kindness had opened the door, but now she was learning kindness alone would not keep her alive in Alexander Kane's empire. Within a week, Lila's presence in Kane Tower was no longer a secret. Word had spread through the executive floors like wildfire. Alexander Kane had hired a waitress, not someone with an MBA from Wharton, not a consultant from McKinsey, A waitress. Executives who once ignored her now eyed her with suspicion and barely concealed contempt. Assistants whispered when she passed, their voices dropping to conspiratorial murmurs. She wasn't just the waitress anymore, she was Alexander Kane's shadow, his mysterious new advisor. And in a world where proximity to power meant danger, shadows often got burned first. The test came during a high-stakes board meeting. The conference room was a masterpiece of modern design: glass walls, leather chairs, a table that could seat 30 people comfortably. A dozen men and women in tailored suits sat around it, each representing millions in assets, decades of experience, and egos the size of skyscrapers. They were arguing over quarterly projections and a potential expansion into Asian markets. When Leela entered quietly, taking her seat beside Alexander, several executives glanced at her with thinly veiled irritation. At one point, a senior executive named Richard Haler, a man in his 50s, with silver hair and a smile that never reached his eyes, leaned forward, his voice sharp with challenge. "With all due respect, Mr. Kane, are we really taking strategic advice from a waitress? What credibility does she have? What expertise? We're discussing multi-billion-dollar decisions here." Leela's cheeks flushed hot. Whispers rippled around the table. Several executives nodded in agreement, their expressions smug. Alexander's gaze sliced through Richard like a blade. "Credibility?" he said coldly. "She saw through a contract that half of you signed off on, without question. That clause would have cost us $3 billion in patent rights. So yes, Richard, I trust her credibility more than most people in this room." But Richard wasn't done. He was one of the old guard, someone who'd been with the company for 15 years and resented Alexander's rapid changes. He slid a thick file toward Leela, his smile sharp. "Then let's hear her thoughts on this. Surely someone with such remarkable insight can analyze our proposed partnership with Chen Industries." The file was massive, filled with financial projections, legal traps, technical specifications. It was clearly a setup, meant to humiliate her in front of everyone, prove she didn't belong. Leela's hands shook as she opened the file. The room seemed to hold its breath. She could feel their eyes on her, waiting for her to fail, waiting to confirm their belief that she was nothing more than an imposter. They want me to fail. She realized, her heart pounding. They want me to prove I don't belong here. She forced herself to focus, to block out the stares and whispers. She had learned something in these weeks. Details mattered. The things people buried, the footnotes they hoped no one would read, that's where the truth hid. She scanned the documents methodically, her eyes moving faster as patterns emerged. Financial projections that seemed too perfect. Partnership terms that looked balanced but weren't. And then she saw it, tiny but devastating. A clause on page 47, buried in legal language. Intellectual property developed during joint ventures shall be considered collaborative assets, with shared ownership rights transferring to primary partner after 5-year period. Her pulse quickened. She looked up, meeting Richard's smug expression. "This isn't a partnership," she said steadily, her voice stronger than she felt. "It's a theft disguised as collaboration. In 5 years, Chen Industries would own our intellectual property. Every innovation, every patent gone. We'd be paying them to steal from us. Silence. Heavy, shocked silence. Richard's smirk faltered. That's standard partnership language. No. Leela interrupted, surprising herself. Standard language protects both parties equally. This is one-sided. And if you didn't notice that, Mr. Hale, then maybe the question isn't about my credibility. Several executives exchanged glances. One woman CFO, Margaret Chen, leaned forward to examine her own copy, her expression darkening as she found the clause. "She's right," Margaret said slowly. "How did we miss this?" Alexander's voice was ice. "Because you weren't looking closely enough. Next time you question her credibility, Richard, make sure you've done your own work first." The board fell into tense silence. Leela had passed her trial, but she had also made her first real enemy. Later that day, as Leela left the tower, Richard Hale's assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Victoria, brushed past her in the lobby. Their shoulders barely touched, but Victoria's whisper was perfectly clear. "You should be careful, Miss Torres. People who rise too fast in this building usually fall much, much harder. And the fall from the top floor? It's fatal." Lila's stomach knotted. It wasn't advice. It was a threat. That evening, in his office, Alexander poured two glasses of whiskey. He handed one to Leela, who took it with trembling hands. "You handled yourself well," he said simply. "I nearly froze," Leela admitted. "I could barely breathe." He shook his head. "No. You saw the truth when no one else did. That's exactly what I need." He took a slow sip. "But you understand now, don't you? Why I warned you. They fear me." Leela whispered, double quotes, "Yes. And when people in positions of power fear someone, they don't just whisper behind their back, they strike. They'll try to destroy you before you can threaten them further." His eyes locked onto hers. "So what are you going to do about it?" Leela thought about running, about going back to the safety of obscurity. But then she remembered the look on Richard's face when she'd exposed his oversight. The shock, the embarrassment, the fear. She had power now. Real power. Not because of money or status, but because she saw what others missed. "I'm going to learn to fight back," she said quietly. Alexander's lips curved in the faintest smile. Good. That night, alone in her apartment, which she hadn't had time to upgrade despite her new salary, Leela stared at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. She still looked like the shy waitress in a simple dress, but her eyes had changed. They were harder now, sharper. She whispered to herself, almost like a vow, "I won't let them break me." The door had opened. She had stepped through, and there was no going back. The waitress who once hid in the corners of a diner had just made her first powerful enemy. And in Alexander Kane's world, enemies didn't just whisper behind your back, they struck when you least expected it. But Leela Torres was learning fast, and sometimes the most dangerous opponents were the ones everyone underestimated. The next week passed in a blur of meetings, documents, and tense encounters. Leela noticed something different in Kane Tower now, smiles that weren't real, compliments laced with venom, and Richard Hale always watching her from across corridors and boardrooms. his lips curled in a thin, knowing smile. Alexander had warned her once. Enemies strike when you least expect it. She could feel it coming. Something was building, a storm gathering just beyond the horizon. The opportunity came at Kane Industries' annual Investor Gala, the social event of the year. For New York's financial elite, the ballroom of the Plaza Hotel glittered with crystal chandeliers, polished marble floors that reflected light like water, and guests in gowns and tuxedos worth more than Lila's yearly salary. Lila stood near the entrance in a simple but elegant navy dress, the most expensive thing she'd ever owned, purchased with her first real paycheck. Yet even in new clothes, she felt like an imposter among women draped in diamonds and designer labels. Alexander moved among the elites with effortless grace, shaking hands, making deals with subtle words and carefully chosen silences. Lila stayed by his side as instructed, quiet but observant, watching the dance of power play out in smiles and champagne toasts. She noticed everything. The investor who laughed too loudly at Alexander's jokes, desperate for favor. The rival CEO whose eyes followed Alexander with barely concealed resentment. The board members who clustered in corners, whispering about restructuring and quarterly losses. And always, Richard Hale watching her with that predatory smile. Halfway through the night, as Leela accepted a glass of water from a passing waiter, Richard approached with champagne in hand, his smile sharp as broken glass. "Mr. Kane," he said smoothly, his voice carrying across the nearby conversations. "Investors would love to hear from your new advisor. Perhaps Miss Torres could explain our upcoming expansion plan. I'm sure she's been thoroughly briefed." Alexander's expression darkened. But before he could refuse, Richard turned directly to Leela, his voice rising just enough to draw attention. "After all, you've given her such responsibility. Surely she's prepared to address our investors. Why don't you explain our upcoming expansion plan to everyone?" The room hushed. Dozens of powerful investors turned their attention to her, cameras from business journalists subtly angled in her direction. Richard had set the trap perfectly. Lila's pulse raced. She hadn't been briefed on any expansion plan. Richard knew that. This was a public execution. If she stumbled, she would embarrass herself and, more importantly, embarrass Alexander in front of the most powerful people in New York. She glanced at Alexander. His jaw was tight, controlled fury simmering beneath his calm exterior. But his eyes held hers steady, as if daring her to rise to the challenge. Leela took a slow breath. Instead of panicking, instead of admitting she didn't know, she did what had gotten her this far, she observed. She walked calmly to the investor presentation board set up at the side of the ballroom. Projected on the screen were graphs, shipping routes, projected revenues, expansion timelines, numbers and data she'd never seen before. But she studied them the way she'd learned to study everything in Alexander's world, looking for the story beneath the numbers, the truth hiding in the details. And then she saw it. The numbers didn't align. Projected shipping costs were based on fuel prices from 6 months ago. The routes showed expansion into Southeast Asian markets. But the cargo capacity calculations assumed partnership with a shipping company that had recently filed for restructuring The entire plan was built on outdated information. It looked impressive on paper, but in reality, it would hemorrhage money. Her fear melted into clarity. She turned back to the crowd, her voice calm but carrying authority she didn't know she possessed. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been shown projections that look impressive. But here's the truth: these numbers don't align with current market conditions. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Investors leaned forward, whispering. Richard's smug smile began to waver. Leela pointed to the fuel cost projections. These shipping calculations are based on fuel prices from 6 months ago. Current prices are 23% higher. That alone would eliminate the projected profit margins. She moved to the shipping routes. And this expansion assumes partnership with Meridian Shipping, which filed for Chapter 11 restructuring 3 weeks ago. They can't fulfill these contracts. The room grew deathly quiet. Several investors pulled out phones, already fact-checking her claims. Leela's voice grew stronger. If we want sustainable growth, we need real numbers based on current data, not illusions designed to look good in a presentation. Kane Industries doesn't build empires on fantasies. We build them on truth. She turned to face Richard directly. And I won't let anyone here be misled, not even accidentally. The implication hung in the air. Asterisk especially not intentionally. Asterisk. The ballroom erupted in whispers. Investors exchanged shocked glances. Business journalists typed furiously on their phones. Alexander Kane's mysterious advisor had just exposed flaws in a major expansion plan. In front of everyone who mattered. Richard Hale's face had turned white, then red. He opened his mouth to protest. But Margaret Chen, the CFO, stepped forward, her tablet already open. She's right, Margaret said flatly, her voice cutting through the noise. I just pulled current fuel contracts and Meridian's filing. Every number she cited is accurate. This presentation should never have been shown without updated data. The crowd turned to Richard. His carefully constructed trap had not just failed, it had exploded in his face. Alexander stepped forward, his voice a blade wrapped in silk. Mr. Hale, it seems Miss Torres has done your job for you. Perhaps next time, you'll ensure your own work is accurate before questioning hers. A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd, sharp, cutting laughter directed at Richard, not Leela. In one moment, she had turned his sabotage into her triumph and his humiliation. Richard's hands trembled as he set down his champagne glass. Without a word, he turned and walked swiftly toward the exit, his assistant scrambling to follow. The trap had backfired spectacularly. As the gala continued, investors approached Leela with new respect. Some asked questions about other projects. Others simply nodded in acknowledgement, seeing her differently now, not as the waitress who got lucky, but as someone with genuine insight. Later, as the crowd thinned and the night wound down, Leela stood by the balcony overlooking Central Park, her heart still racing from the confrontation. The city lights stretched endlessly, beautiful and terrifying. Alexander approached, his presence as commanding as ever. You turned his sabotage into a victory. I was terrified, Leela admitted, her voice shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. He gave her rare, approving nod. Fear isn't weakness. Fear sharpens those who know how to use it. You didn't freeze. You adapted. That's the difference between surviving and conquering. For the first time since entering his world, she allowed herself a small smile. Then maybe I'm learning. Alexander's expression softened almost imperceptibly. You're doing more than learning. You're becoming dangerous. And in this world, that's the highest compliment I can give. But across the ballroom, before he disappeared into the night, Richard Hale watched them from the shadows. His humiliation tonight had been complete public, devastating, career-threatening. And Leela knew. With chilling certainty this wasn't over. She had won the battle, but she'd made an enemy who would stop at nothing for revenge. The shy waitress had survived her first public trial, turning sabotage into triumph. But in Alexander Kane's empire, victories came at a price, and enemies never stopped plotting. The game had only just begun. After the gala, something shifted between Leela and Alexander. The professional distance remained, but beneath it ran an undercurrent of mutual respect and something else neither of them was ready to name. Leela noticed something new about Alexander in the days that followed. His confidence in public remained unshaken, his commands precise and final. But in private moments when he thought no one was watching, his gaze would drift to shadows, his jaw tightening as though fighting memories that refused to stay buried. One late night, Leela entered his office to deliver quarterly reports. The city glowed beyond the windows, a living tapestry of light and shadow. She found him standing motionless, staring at a photograph on his desk, a young boy, barely 10 years old, smiling with a toy airplane clutched in small hands. The joy in the child's face was pure, untouched by the world's cruelty. She froze, hesitant. "Is that your son?" Alexander quickly flipped the frame face down, his expression shuddering like a door slamming shut. "Brother," he said curtly, the single word sharp as a blade. "He's gone." The coldness in his tone told her not to press further. But the crack in his armor was undeniable, a glimpse of the wound that had shaped him. Days later, while gathering reports from the executive archive room, Leela overheard two senior analysts gossiping in the corridor. She stood hidden behind the shelves, unseen. "They say Kane's brother drowned when they were children," one whispered, her voice low and conspiratorial. "No, I heard differently," another countered. "The brother was deaf, born that way, and Kane's family blamed Alexander for the accident that took him. Something about a lake, a moment of carelessness. They say Kane's father never forgave him. That's why he's so ruthless now, building an empire to prove something to ghosts." Leela's heart clenched. Asterisk deaf, asterisk suddenly. Everything made sense, the way Alexander had defended Ethan in the restaurant with such fierce emotion, the way his voice had cut through the crowd with barely controlled rage. It wasn't just about kindness. It was personal, deeply, devastatingly personal. That evening, she found him alone on the tower's private balcony, a space reserved only for him. 60 floors above the chaos below. City lights stretched endlessly in every direction, a kingdom of glass and ambition. For once, he didn't look like the untouchable CEO who commanded boardrooms with a glance. He looked like a man weighed down by ghosts he couldn't escape. She approached quietly, unsure if she should intrude. But something compelled her forward. "Your brother," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the wind. Was he deaf? Alexander stiffened, his hand tightening on the railing until his knuckles turned white. He didn't answer at first. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken pain. Finally, his voice came low, raw, stripped of its usual steel. "Yes." He turned to face her, his gaze piercing, but vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. His name was David. He was 8 years old, loved airplanes, loved the water, loved life with the kind of joy that made everyone around him smile. Alexander's jaw clenched. I was 13. We were at a lake house, one of the few vacations we could afford. I was supposed to watch him that day. My mother was inside, my father at work. David wanted to swim. He loved the water, but he couldn't hear warnings, couldn't hear when the current got too strong. His voice cracked slightly. I was on the dock, reading a book, thinking he was fine. By the time I looked up, by the time I noticed the splashing had stopped, it was too late. Lila's chest ached. She could see it in his eyes, the guilt that had carved itself into his soul. The weight of a moment that had defined his entire life. "It wasn't your fault," she whispered. "You were just a child yourself." His voice hardened, defensive. I was old enough to pay attention, old enough to keep him safe. And I failed. Your family blamed you. Alexander's laugh was bitter, hollow. My father never spoke to me again. Not really. He looked at me like I was a murderer who stole his favorite son. My mother tried to bridge the gap, but the damage was done. I left home at 16, built everything from nothing because I had nothing left to lose. He paused, staring out at the city. I swore no one close to me would ever be unseen again. That's why I built an empire, so I'd have the power to make sure people who are different, people who are overlooked, don't just survive. They matter. Leela stepped closer, her voice soft but steady. That's why you knew, when you saw me with Ethan, that I was different. You weren't just impressed by my kindness. You saw your brother in him, and you saw someone finally giving him what David never got acknowledgement. Alexander looked at her sharply, almost offended by how deeply she'd seen through him. But then his gaze softened, the walls lowering just slightly. Careful, Miss Torres. You see too much. That's dangerous in this world. Leela smiled faintly, sadly. That's why you hired me. For a long moment. They stood together in silence, the wind whipping around them, the city spreading below like a promise and a warning. You hide behind power, Leela finally said. But deep down, you're just trying to make sure no one feels the way your brother did. The way you did. Carrying that guilt, Alexander's expression flickered surprise, recognition. Something almost like relief that someone finally understood. And maybe, she added gently, it's time you forgave yourself. Asterisk just as the moment grew tender. Intimate in a way neither expected, Alexander's phone buzzed sharply. His face darkened as he read the message, the vulnerability vanishing behind steel walls once more. They're moving against us again, he said, his voice cold and lethal. Richard isn't working alone. Someone bigger is pulling the strings. Someone who wants to destroy everything I've built. The warmth of the moment vanished, replaced by the cold edge of war. But Leela held onto what she had seen, the truth beneath his armor. The wounded boy hiding inside the ruthless billionaire. For the first time, she didn't just want to survive in his world. She wanted to help him heal from it. And that desire terrified her more than any enemy ever could. The billionaire CEO had built his empire on silence and steel, on guilt transformed into power. But one shy waitress had uncovered his deepest wound, and that truth would bind them together in ways neither had expected. The past was never truly buried. It shaped everything, and in the coming battle, both of them would need to face their ghosts or be consumed by them.